Hi everybody, I'm Tangerine. I'm here from New Orleans. This presentation is called Feminism in Comics, How Female Characters Exist in a World Shaped by Male Fantasy. It is a 5-minute version of my undergraduate thesis, so we'll see if it still makes sense. I narrowed it down to DC because it was so short, so it's largely DC Comics also. If you were looking for some Marvel stuff, it's not here. Alright, so traditionally the world of comics is a male-dominated arena. Female characters can exist in here, but they only exist in a few niches, and the representations tend to be very limited and biased. So there are 3 main categories that women fall into. There's the vixen. The vixen is a female villain who necessarily uses her feminine wiles as a tool against the hero. The vixen is problematic because she owns her sexuality, and her ownership of her sexuality is what makes her dangerous, thereby teaching us that we cannot own our sexuality. Oh no, my slides are going so quickly, guys. I'm really behind. This is a shrieking violet. She's a woman who's in need of protection from the hero at all times. So even though Lois Lane is extraordinarily independent and powerful, her agency is constantly removed so that Superman can rescue her, and that is also a problematic depiction of a woman. The last is the heroine, Wonder Woman. The heroine is a woman who has superhuman strength and beauty, and because she's such an unrealistic, beautiful standard, and she has unshakable morality and resolve, she's not something that we can look up to either. So the question becomes, can these characters ever be truly feminist if they exist in a patriarchal framework? Sexism in comics was a bit of like a super important thing in the 70s, and DC kind of thought they took care of it when they rebranded Wonder Woman, so that's why this is kind of a little bit of a presentation that rails against them. And that is the first Wonder Woman. So Laura Mulvey wrote an article or a paper called Visual Pleasure and Narrative Cinema, where she argues that scopophilia, which is pleasure in looking, can be used as a means for objectification. It's the foundation for her concept of the male gaze. So by looking, men are able to reduce female-presenting bodies to sexual objects. By catering to the male gaze, so do our caped heroes in our comics. And despite the fact that both male and female presenting bodies in comics are held up to an unrealistic standard, they're often created with the male consumer in mind. And so portrayals of women are created, observed, and maintained exclusively through the male gaze. Guys, I didn't plan any breathing in this. Even if we choose not to consider the visual impact of these, DC leaves stuff to be desired with character development. Major female players are often written as disposable, so they can be tortured, killed, gotten rid of in the name of preserving the hero and his integrity. Gloria Steinem wrote an introduction for the Diana Prince rebranding of Wonder Woman, and she argued that this kind of repeated imagery of women needing rescue leads women to identify with being passive and incompetent. Many women in DC Comics reinforce the idea that a woman is only defined by the greatness of her man. I'm ahead of my slides now. This is Diana Prince Wonder Woman. So a woman is only defined by the greatness of her man. So in fact, anything that she accomplished before he showed up is irrelevant, just like Harley Quinzel versus Harley Quinn. She's a doctor, but she's better as a sex slave to the Joker. So the questions you want to kind of ask yourself when you're evaluating, is a comic book that I'm reading feminist, are the women either controlling villains or passive assistants? Do they have a role outside of that? Does a female character possess any will or agency of her own? And is her world patriarchal, and does that reflect in her attitude and her character? Positive role models do exist in the world of DC, like Batgirl and Black Orchid. They're written kind of in an awesome way. Many of the people who have written Black Orchid and Batgirl have tried really, really hard to make them super feminist. Like super hard. The DC doesn't really want to publish those stories. And so that representation is not sufficient in combating this overarching system of male dominance that we're faced with. Statistics show that women prefer manga or alt comics. There are 3 main reasons for that. One is that women are more likely to see a body-positive representation or find characters that they can identify with on a personal level. 2 is that women are typically treated like shit in the comic book store, and manga and alternative comics are available at the bookstore or the library, where you don't have to prove something to take them home with you. And the final reason that women have a hard time finding comics that are accessible to them is because DC actually doesn't really care. They don't really want to reach out to a female audience because they've never needed the female audience to make a lot of money. So they were worried about like Black Orchid, for example, because they didn't think that people wanted to buy lady superheroes. They didn't want to publish any Black Orchid. So what you can do to combat this is support women, POC, and trans comic book writers. Challenge your favorite authors to consider the feminist aspects of their characters. Uphold your friends who want to write comics. And let's smash the patriarchy together, y'all.